Mr. Ambassador, from the early days of subprime lending, there was a small, lonely group who sided with the consumer advocates fighting the subprime companies. The attorneys general in a handful of states like Iowa, Minnesota, Washington, and Illinois. They too had heard borrower complaints firsthand and saw the havoc that subprime lending was working on communities. Some of them also understand that this wasn't just about the borrowers. It's not in anyone's long-term interest for customers to get loans they can't pay back, says Pretty Cox, the former attorney with the the former attorney with the Minnesota Attorney General Office. It's only in the short-term interest of those who are raking in fees. On a conference call with several other AGs in 2005, he said bluntly, "This whole thing is going to collapse." This alliance of attorneys general had investigated Fierce Alliance and then stuck a landmark one for 484 million settlement with household finance in 2002. I first heard about FAMCO when someone walked into my office with a complaint from a customer that he had paid 30% of the loan amount in fees, says Cox. I said, "That's a typo. 30% of the loan's amount." I said, "That's a typo. Call me back." I wasn't a typo. Cox's second by wake up call came after the household statement. "We thought we had won a big thing," he says. "We thought we had solved the problem of predatory lending. Stupid us. Immediately after we did this, the industry tripled." By 2004, the AGs were targeting another lender, one that Cox called the prototype of the new breed of subprime lenders. Its loan volume was enormous. "We had these spreadsheets showing all the loans," Cox says. He recalls thinking to himself, "Oh my God, the scope of their lending is unbelievable." The company was Ronald Arnold's Americas that summer. Cox first started hearing complaints from customers that Americas had inflated the value of their homes, qualifying them for loans they couldn't afford. In fact, all over the country, complaints were flooding in the Americas had not only inflated appraisals, but had encouraged customers to lie about their income or their employment and had misled borrowers about the fees embedded in their loans. They had promised people they'd be able to refinance out of expensive loans without disclosing that Americans had stuck on hefty prepayment penalties if they did so. And on and on. By then, Cox knew not to expect help from federal regulators. He started calling the OCC the Office of Corporate Counsel for the banking industry. The Fed, he says, viewed the AGs as mosquitoes. After all, those smart bankers on Wall Street wouldn't securities supreme loans if they were that terrible, would they? Who do you trust? Cox says. A bunch of stupid public service lawyers who mostly aren't even making six figures, are the people on Wall Street who are making 8 or 9 figures. It was an easy answer for the Fed. He adds, the regulators were totally uninterested in looking underground at what was happening to actual human beings. We were the only cubes on the beat, and we were the people with the smallest hammer. In August of 2004, a group of America's executives, including General Counsel Tom Noto, flew to Iowa to meet with Iowa Attorney General Tom Miller and several others. The America's executives were cooperative. Their response to the complaints was consistent. We don't do that. That's not the kind of company we were. When faced with a particularly ugly loan, they say, that's an outlier. How could that be? The AGs wondered when the horror stories were so uniform and came from all over the country. I think they were clever, says one participant. This was a clever company led by an excellently clever man. I mean clever in the sense of smart. In early 2005, as the negotiations were getting underway, the Los Angeles Times published a scathing expose of America's. The headline read, "Workers say lender ran boiler rooms." Among other things, the story noted that lawsuits filed by customers in California and at least 20 other states allege a partner of fraud. One person who read the article was Robert Naizda, the general counsel of the Groening Institute. Over the years, Naizda had become friendly with Arnold, seduced by his charm and his seemingly sincere commit to good lending practices. He said they were trying to be the best supreme lender in the country, and I thought this guy could do it. Naizda recalls. His non-profit had taken grants from Arnold for affordable housing and was in discussions with Arnold about an additional $1.5 million grant. When the Times expose was published, Naizda called Arnold. One of Arnold's executives called him back and told him the story was all wrong. I said, "This is too disturbing," says Naizda. "I need a written refutation or I'm out." He also insisted that Arnold call for an independent investigation of the allegations. Arnold refused. NISA sent back 100,000 check that Greenlining had received from Americas. I was told that Ronald was infuriated. He adds, I got to know Arnold very well. I got to like him, and then I was very disappointed by him, to put it mildly. As the negotiations with the AGs heated up, several state attorneys general and their aides flew out to Orange County for a meeting at America's headquarters. Arnold, who was not part of the negotiating team, asked Iowa's Tom Miller and Arizona Attorney General Terry Goddard to come to his office. We've got a few hot apples, and we didn't deal with it quickly enough, Arnold told them. Miller quickly disagreed. The problems are pervasive, he said. Later that night, about a dozen people from both sides, it was like the Arab-Israeli peace accords. Jack Cox went out to dinner at the restaurant in Anaheim. During the dinner, Arnold stood up and said, I'm embarrassed that you all had to come out here. I'm ashamed. I started thinking, well, just a few hours ago you were saying this was just a few bad apples, recalls Miller. When that didn't work, you changed direction. Cox, for his part, was sitting. After the dinner, he sent 50 to Americas to reimburse them for his meal. Americas told him that the cost was actually 98 per person. He forked over the remaining 48 with a note that said next time he's treat at a fast food restaurant. On January 33, 2006, the AGs announced that Americas had agreed to pay $300 to $5 million to settle allegations from 49 states that it had engaged in extensive customer abuse. Americas didn't operate in Virginia because the state requires detailed financial disclosure by the main shareholder of any company doing business there, which Arnold refused to provide. Americas denied all the allegations but agreed to make major change in its business, including charging how appraisals were handled, eliminating incentives to sale personnel to include prepayment penalties or any other fees, and charging the same interest rates and discount point of customers with similar credit profiles. It also set up a fund to make restitution to customers who could show they had been ripped off by the company. Most of the AGs were happy. They felt this established They felt this established a model that the rest of the industry would have to follow. Indeed, after the settlement, New Century wrote in its annual report that if it had to follow the wilderness Americans had agreed to, some of our practices could be called into question and our revenues, business, result of operation and profitability could be harmed, which in effect was an admission that the entire industry had been built on a foundation of fraud. As if to prove the point, Americas never really recovered from the settlement. Corporate is making a big push now to clean up its dirty image because of the heat coming down, wrote one employee on the customer website Repov, reporting the spring of 2005. This employee added, "Good luck to everyone who is fighting this devil of a company. You will need it." A few months later, on the same site, someone who called himself Eric and said he was an America's executive wrote, "We will not come out stronger. The company will be better, cleaner, and less profitable. The glory days are over in this company, so pack up your glory and head elsewhere." In May, less than 5 months after the settlement was struck, Americas announced that it was closing all 2,000 or 200 to 9 retail branches and eliminating 3,800 jobs, and would henceforth operate throughout for large regional call centers. It seemed kind of hairless because they made such a big deal out of team, family, and then, all of a sudden, boom, says one employee who was laid off. The way it was done was especially impersonal. Each department was called into a conference room to hear the news via a conference call, which wasn't even live, but rather a tape loop that played over and over again. At headquarters, the mood was bleak. Once the AGs really starting digging around and more information became available to employees, that's when people really began to question who we were, and what we were doing as an organization, says a former executive. Asim Mittal, a veteran of America's parent company, ACC, became CEO in June. Mittal insisted that Americas could still success with its new model, and that growth would be steady. But it turned out Eric was right, either because Americas couldn't operate profitable under its agreement with the AGs, or because it couldn't operate at all. For instance, an appraiser Americas hired to help clean up its practices discovered that in New York, the company's loan officers were paying huge sums to a group of appraisers, all of whom worked for the same outside firm, and these appraisers were consistently valuing the homes and 100% of the value that the loan officers had assigned the properties. Upon further beginning, he discovered that the owner of the outside firm was the wife of one of America's employees, and while Americas was supposed to install a new system that ferreted off appraisal fraud in its for new call install a new system that ferreted out appraisal fraud in its for new call centers. This person says that the company made a decision not to install it in its Sacramento office. By late 2006, Americas was searching for a buyer, and by early 2007, ACC was running low on cash. Then came a revealing moment, one that gave a glimpse into just how clever Roland Arnold could be. In 2004, he had invited Deval Patrick, the same Deval Patrick who had led the early Justice Department investigation into the lending practices at Long Beach to join ACC's board. Patrick was paid $3,006 million a year. He resigned from the board 2 years later to run for governor of Massachusetts, and he won. In March 2007, as ACC was flailing, Governor Patrick made a call on behalf of Arnold. According to the Boston Globe, he found Robert Rubin, who was then the vice chairman of Citigroup and someone Patrick knew from the Clinton administration. A week after the call, Citigroup agreed to put fresh working capital into ACC. Arnold also contributed some of his personal wealth to keep the company going. By the fall of 2008, Americas had been shut down. Citigroup took over the $4.5 billion portfolio of loans that needed to be served from ACC's Argent division. Patrick later apologized for making the call, acknowledging that financial exploitation of the poor, elderly, and minorities was pervasive at Americas. But that call, as it turned out, wasn't the only favor he did for Arnold. In 2008, the OCC put together a document called Worst Then in the Worst Then. It listed the 10 worst lenders in the 10 metropolitan areas with the highest rate of foreclosure. The document vividly displayed the havoc that Arnold's companies were ranking on the American landscape. There were a total of 21 companies of the list. Arnold Argent made the top 10 in all 10 cities and was number 1 in Cleveland and Detroit. Long Beach made 9th of the 10 list, landing the top stop in Sacramento, Stockton, Memphis, and Denver. And Americas made 7 of the 10 list, despite having slowed down its lending significantly since the settlement with the state attorneys general. And yet, at the time, it was as if the America's investigation and statement has happened in a parallel universe. In the spring of 2005, after the Los Angeles Times expose had been published, but before the big AG settlement, President Bush nominated Arnold to be the U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands. Maybe this shouldn't have been a surprise. According to the Los Angeles Times, between 2004 and 2008, Arnold and his wife downsized and gave more than $12 million to GOP causes and candidates. The donation included $5 million from Down to the Progress for America Voter Fund, which shared some donors with the swift broad ads that helped bring down the 2004 Democratic presidential candidate, John Kerry. Shortly after winning re-election, Bush announced the appointment of the Arnold as honorary co-chairs of the inaugural fundraising committee. That wasn't really a surprise either, as USA Today wrote, inaugural fundraiser down and Ronald Arnold found a creative way to pump more than 205,000 limit into the event. Their mortgage firm, America's Capital, contributed the maximum, as did 3 subsidiaries for a total of $1 million. Arnold said that he supported Bush's stance on Israel, but few believed that was the only explanation. Many of his philanthropic pursuits and major marketing campaigns were designed to generate the greatest political influence, says a former executive. Arnold's confirmation hearing took place in November 2005. His wife and his brother, Claude, sat proudly in the audience. Tom Lantos, a Holocaust survivor and a Democratic congressman from California, who Arnold had long supported, introduced him. I strongly believe, Mr. Chairman, that Ronald is one of the great anonymous philanthropists of our time, said Lantos. Norm Coleman, the Republican senator from Minnesota, called Arnold a friend, and said, "I'm particularly proud of Mr. Arnold's achievements. Senator George Allen, the Republican from Virginia, noted that the governor of Mississippi, Halleck Barbour, had sent a thank you note for Arnold's generosity in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, and he pointed out that letter supporting Arnold had arrived from the Speaker of the California State Assembly, the Governor of Pennsylvania, and the Mayor of Los Angeles. Not surprisingly, America's or Don Arnold personally had given generous political contribution to all three. When it was Arnold's turn to speak, he began by saying, "I have made do the right thing by motto." He added, "I will consider our company the anti-predatory company." In the late 80s, when we founded the company, we provide credit to folks who did not have the opportunity because of their credit history to borrow directly from the institutional banks. And so it went. There were only two senators that day who seriously challenged Arnold. One was Paul Sarbanes, who pointed to the still ongoing America's investigation and asked whether Arnold had truly lived up to his motto. Arnold responded with his "few bad apples" line. Some of our employees did not do the right thing. When we found out they were let go on action was taken so that it wouldn't happen again. The other senator was Barack Obama. I mean, if you go through the record of the allegations that were made, they were allegations that I think most of us would consider to be very problematic, said Obama. And I'm wondering whether it is appropriate for us to send someone to represent our country with these issues still looming on the horizon. Thank you, Senator. Arnold responds, I've read up on your background and I'm very impressed with your life history and I can appreciate your concerns. I can assure you, Senator, that I have absolutely nothing to do, nor does my wife, in terms of these negotiations. Then Obama said, I've gotten a couple of letters here from people who were previously antagonistic to America's activities that are now writing letters of support, which I think is a testament to you and your capacity to win over and work with people who may not have been on the same side in it initially. I've got a letter from Deval Patrick, who actually is a good personal friend of mine. As you know, Arnold replied, he's a man of high integrity and would not sit on our board unless he felt that it was worthy of who he is and what he represents. Absolutely, said Obama. Says one person who was 15, Arnold nomination. We were absolutely devastated. Here was a prominent African American Democrat saying that this guy was giving opportunities to minorities and providing cover for Democrats. On February 8, 2006, Arnold was confirmed by the Senate. The vote took place 1 month after the announcement of the 3,025 million settlement with the state attorneys. Press reports say that the payment cleared the way for Arnold's confirmation. One last time, Arnold's willingness to pay to make problems to away had served him well. It wasn't Supreme products alone that put us where we are. Option ARMs can be an appropriate product for a certain kind of borrower. We never thought of them as Supreme. It was the behavior, the mindset that took hold. The gun didn't kill the market. The shooter did. 26-year-old college grads with their navy blue suits and cuff links and slicked back hair will come into broker shops acting all full of themselves because they were pulling down 150 a year. They didn't know anything about the business, but they were inviting us to parties and conventions, and the music played and the booze flowed. I had an originator that made 100 on one loan that I referred to her at a 40% split. Yet she had the audacity to tell me that it should have been a 15 to 15 split. That one loan paid her more money than her salary for an entire year at the previous job. That exchange was eyes-opening to me about a dark mindset that had taken over. There were commissions, incentives for prepayment penalties. Lenders enticed organizers offering bigger YSP on specific products they wanted to sell and would charge hard discounts on those they didn't. The entire industry was driven by yield. Lenders were simply driving volume any way they could. The fight for loans and market share was fierce. All that marketing power slowly evolved into a way of life. We were hammered every day. I ran an accounting business before I got into the mortgage business. My perspective was one of how to be creative and stay within the wide lines. At one time, there was a clearly delighted line of who qualified and who didn't. With each new day came a new product that moved that line ever so slowly away from prudent risk manager into the world of high fees. There were those in the business who couldn't get it done within the lines They just moved the lines. It was known as structuring the loan. That meant if it didn't qualify one way, make it qualify another way. I remember giving a realtor seminar one day and not only saying, but actually believing. The lenders are offering these products. They have lots of brain power in the risk, legal, compliance, and secondary market departments. They know they know the risks they are taking and they price for it. Who who was I to question them? So much for that. I remember a woman who worked for me making incredulous statements like, hey, they just upped the FICO requirement to 580 18. It is clear to me, Killian concluded, that a slow creep took over, a slow moving slime that ultimately permeated the industry. I have this picture of lava just creeping along until every business was covered with it, eventually getting smothered. What infuriated Prentice Cox more than anything was the realizations that no one cared. The war was lost, he says, even as the supreme business descended into true madness. The national banking regulator remained hopeless. In late 2005, the bank supervisors asked for comment from the industry on proposed guidance for non-traditional mortgage. The industry pushed back. The American Financial Services Association argued that it was unnecessarily stringent to require lenders to assess whether a borrower would be able to pay the full cost of a loan. The The American Banker Association said that the giants overstate the risk of this mortgage product. It was incorrect, said the ABA, that they were riskier. Rather, they simply present different types of risk that may be well managed by product lenders. The AFSA also asked the regulator to make it clear that guidance was not intended to be statements of absolute rules. Consumer groups pleaded for stricter rules. The California Reinvestment Coalition argued that regulators shouldn't allow certain kinds of risk lawyering, such as stated income option ARMs, calling such loans a daily combination for unsuspecting and uneducated customers, wrote Kevin Stein, the CRC's associate director. Underwriting practices that misrepresent a subprime borrower's ability to repay a loan benefit neither customers nor the economic stability of financial institutions. He added, borrowers are increasingly stuck with loans they cannot afford. All the ingredients for a financial disaster are in place. When the regulator finally issued the guidance in the fall of 2006, it required lenders to include consideration of a borrower's repayment capacity, but the guidance applied only to the category of mortgages that allowed borrowers to defer the payment of principal or interest, and most important, it was just guidance. It didn't carry the force of law. Subprime companies could ignore it. To see that to see what that mean in practice, you needed look any further than the office, the Thrive Supervision, which supervised Washington Mutual. After a meeting with the OTS in the fall of 2006, a WAMU executive wrote an email in which he summarized the regulator positions. Their initial response was that they view the guidance as flexible. They specifically point out that the language in the guidance say should versus must in most cases, and they are looking to WAMU to establish our position on how the guidance impacts our business practices. A Senate investigation later concluded that during the drafting of the guidance, the OTS had argued that less stringent standards. It was very much in keeping with the turn the agency had taken under James Gilleron, the agency's director from late 2001 to the spring of 2005. The OTS had shrunk disastrously. Gilleron chopped 30% of its staff in 2002. The OTS' new goal, it said, was to place emphasis on instruction, not the regulator. They ensure compliance with all existing laws, including customer protection statutes. What's more, the OTS was funded from fees paid by the tribes themselves, based on their size. When Guilleron had taken the job, the OTS had been, as he later put it, in a deficit financial position. WAMU's rapid growth, thanks to its exploding subprime business, meant that it was becoming an ever more important source of funds for its regulator. Between 2003 and 2008, for instance, WAMU's fees represent 30 to 50% of the agency's revenue, according to the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation. Perhaps that explains why John Reich, General's replacement at OTS, one described Gary Killinger, WAMU's CEO, as my largest continued asset-wise. When Washington Mutual executive analyzed the consequence of implementing the regulator's guidance, they conclude that it will reduce volume by 33%. So they didn't do it. As late as June 2008, an FDIC examiner found that WAMU was not in compliance with interagency guidance on non-traditional mortgage that it took regulators until, until so late in the Supreme Madness to announce the guidance can't be blamed only on the OTS. There was another culprit, the Federal Reserve. The Fed's mindset was on display in a late 2004 piece published by the New York Fed entitled Are Home Prices the Next Bubble? The answer, as for the likelihood of a severe drop in home price, or examination of historical national home prices finds no basis for concerns, even after Bernanke had replaced Greenspan as chairman in February 2006. It remained in spirit Greenspan's feet. The market still knew best. The market knew better than Carter bureaucrats how to properly price risk. Market discipline will prevent truly hard things from happening. The most important task of the banking regulator was to get out of the market's way. The president of the New York Fed by then was one of Rubin's proteges from the Clinton Treasury, Tim Geithner, who had risen to be Undersecretary for International Affairs while still in his 30s. When he was named to head the New York Federal Reserve in 2003, he was all of 42, having studied out the feet of Rubin, Summers, and Greenspan. It was perhaps inevitable that he would share their mindset about the virtues of the market. As the guidance was being discussed within the government, there were bank supervisors who were arguing that the Fed needed to clamp down on both mortgage lending and commercial real estate practices, especially given the rapid growth of both asset classes in 2000. But there were, shall we say, alternate concerns, which were expressed by Geithner and others who shared his views. What would the effect beyond the mortgage and housing market in the Fed were having handed? What would the effect beyond the bottom lines of banks? The Fed slowed down the guidance, says one person. It was slowed down by internal debates about how far the regulator should go since most of the mortgage were sold into the market, and this guidance will replace investor rights appetites with regulatory standards. The supreme companies were like rats racing on a wheel, going faster and faster, knowing that if they stopped, the gig was up. They had to keep their volume up. Their very survival depended on it. They needed a constant influx of cash either from the sale of loans to Wall Street or from selling equity and debt to keep going. Slowing volume would be a sign that the party was coming to an end. Investors and lenders would bolt. By comparison, the fact that the loans were getting worse and worse was a known issue. Who cared? Regulator and executive alike assumed they had kicked the can to someone else, namely the investor who purchased the mortgage-backed securities where most of these loans wound up. In a 2005 memo about Washington Mutual, the FDIC summed up the prevailing sentiment. Management believes, however, that the impact on WMB of a housing downturn will be manageable since the riskiest segments of production are sold to investors, and that these investors will hear the brunt of a purchasing housing bubble. And what did Wall Street think about the way the subprime business had gone mad? Wall Street didn't care either. If anything, Wall Street was encouraging the subprime companies in their race to the bottom. Looser loans mean higher yields. A company will come to us and say, "We can't believe your FICO doesn't go to 1 to 580, recalls a former Morgan Stanley executive. You're 630, but Lehman will go to 530. Here was the ultimate consequence of the linking of borrowers and lenders, which securitization had made possible. No one in the chain Here was the ultimate consequence of the linking of borrower and lender, which securitization had made possible. No one in the chain, from broker to subprime originator to Wall Street, cared that the loans they were making and selling were likely to go bad. In truth, they were all taking on huge risks in granting these terrible loans, but they were all making too much money to see it. Everyone assumed that someone else would be left holding the bag.